Over 12,000 combat missions by the United States and Israel have now been carried out against Iran. They have destroyed most of Iran's navy, severely degraded its air force, struck its missile production facilities, damaged its nuclear infrastructure, and killed senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, including the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy. Iran is still firing missiles and drones. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and there is no surrender. This is not an accident. It is not a failure of targeting or intelligence. It is the result of a military and strategic reality that has played out in nearly every major bombing campaign in modern history, and that most coverage of this conflict is not explaining clearly. This video answers the question that more people are asking every week. Why does overwhelming air power not force a country to give up? And what does the answer mean for how this war actually ends? The idea that AIR power alone can end a war has been tested repeatedly throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, and the historical record is remarkably consistent. In World War II, the Allied strategic bombing campaign against Germany was the largest air operation in history. Hundreds of thousands of tons of bombs were dropped on German cities and industrial targets over 4 years. German aircraft production actually peaked in 1944, after years of sustained bombing. German military output increased, not decreased, under the pressure of sustained air attack. The war ended when Allied ground forces captured Berlin. It did not end when the last bomb fell. In Vietnam, the United States dropped more bomb tonnage than in all of World War II combined. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, the primary supply route the bombing was designed to interdict, continued to function throughout the war. North Vietnam continued fighting for decades. The war ended in a political negotiation, not an aerial victory. In Kosovo in 1999, NATO conducted 78 days of airstrikes before Serbia agreed to withdraw from Kosovo. This case is often cited as the one instance where air power alone achieved a strategic outcome. Analysts still debate whether it was the bombing itself or the credible threat of a NATO ground invasion, combined with the withdrawal of Russian diplomatic support, that produced the result. The bombing campaign alone was not decisive. The pattern is not a coincidence. It reflects something fundamental about how air power works and what it cannot do. Air power destroys hardware. It does not destroy will. Wars are ultimately decided by will. Iran presents specific challenges that make air power only strategies particularly difficult, beyond the general historical pattern. First, Iran's military infrastructure was deliberately built to absorb this exact scenario. Decades of preparing for a US or Israeli air campaign have produced a military architecture designed for resilience, not performance in the open. Missile launchers are mobile. They fire and move before a counterstrike can be plotted. Command and control is decentralized, so destroying a headquarters does not collapse the chain of command. Underground facilities were built specifically to survive strikes that would destroy surface targets. Many of Iran's most sensitive assets have been relocated underground over the past 20 years, precisely in anticipation of this moment. Second, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, operates as a parallel military structure with its own command hierarchy, funding streams, weapons systems, and a motivational framework built on ideological commitment rather than purely professional military obligation. Destroying hardware does not destroy the organization. Killing commanders creates martyrs. IRGC has survived 40 years of sanctions, proxy conflicts, and internal pressure. It was built to endure. Third, and most importantly, Iran has a documented strategic doctrine of asymmetric persistence, the deliberate strategy of making a conflict too costly to sustain, even for a vastly superior military power. Iran does not need to win the air war. It needs to make the cost of continuing the air war politically unsustainable in Washington, in allied capitals, and in the global markets that are feeling the effects of a closed strait. Every United States aircraft lost, every service member killed, every $1 billion of munitions expended, every week of elevated oil prices. These are not side effects of the conflict from Iran's perspective. They are the strategy. There's a second layer to this problem that receives less attention than it deserves. The United States is running out of the munitions needed to sustain this campaign at its current pace. In the first 6 days of Operation Epic Fury alone, the United States expended an estimated $11 billion in munitions. Tomahawk cruise missiles, produced at a rate of roughly 300 per year over the previous 5 years, were being fired at a rate of dozens per day in the opening phase. JASSM-ER long-range strike missiles, one of the United States military's most capable standoff weapons, have been depleted to approximately 425 globally, down from a stockpile that was already considered insufficient before this conflict began. You cannot sustain a bombing campaign indefinitely if you are consuming precision weapons faster than industry can produce them. The factories that make these missiles operate on 2 to 3 year production timelines. There is no rapid surge capacity. What gets fired today cannot be replaced for years. This is the other side of the cost asymmetry equation. Iran fires $35,000 drones. The United States responds with $1 million missiles. At scale, over weeks and months, that math becomes a strategic constraint, not just a financial one. Iran's most powerful remaining leverage is not military, it is geographic. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway between the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf, is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it daily. Since the beginning of this conflict, Iran has closed the strait using sea mines, explosive drone boats, and shore-based anti-ship missiles positioned along its coastline. Iran's conventional navy has been largely destroyed by the United States and Israeli strikes. But closing the strait does not require a conventional navy. It requires mines seeded across a narrow channel, small fast boats loaded with explosives, and missile launchers hidden along a coastline. None of these require warships. All of them are difficult to eliminate comprehensively from the air without a sustained ground operation along Iran's southern coast. The economic consequences of a closed strait are immediate and global. Oil prices have risen sharply since the closure. Shipping insurance rates for the region have spiked. Nations that depend on Gulf oil exports are experiencing direct economic pressure. That pressure translates into political pressure on the United States and its allies. Pressure to negotiate, to de-escalate, to accept a ceasefire that Iran can present as something other than total defeat. This is Iran's leverage. Not its air force, which is destroyed. Not its navy, which is sunk. Its geography and the economic pain it can inflict are the real tools of leverage, and they do not require a single functioning warship. History and the current military situation point to the same conclusion. Air power sets conditions. It does not end wars by itself. Something else has to close the gap between degrading an adversary and compelling them to accept your terms. 3 scenarios could realistically end this conflict. The first is a negotiated ceasefire, which requires Iran to accept terms it has publicly and repeatedly rejected, and which requires the United States to offer something Iran considers worth accepting. Negotiations are reportedly ongoing through intermediaries, but the positions remain far apart. The second is a ground operation. The United States military is reported to be planning options for the seizure of Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export terminal, located in the northern Persian Gulf. Taking Karg would cut off Iran's remaining oil revenue and could force a negotiated outcome faster than continued airstrikes. But it would also mark a significant escalation, expose ground forces to Iranian fire, and potentially draw Iran's proxy network, including Hezbollah and Iraqi militias, into direct action against United States targets across the region. The third scenario is internal collapse, regime change driven by the economic and military pressure building inside Iran. This is the outcome the U.S. government publicly states it is not pursuing, while privately hoping for. It is also the least controllable and most historically unlikely outcome of a sustained air campaign. Populations under attack tend to rally around their governments, not overthrow them. What is increasingly clear is that the current approach has reached the limit of what it can achieve. Iran has been degraded but not defeated. The strait is still closed. The drones are still flying. The cost in American munitions, aircraft, and strategic resources is rising every week, with no clear endpoint in sight.